afternoon. I am on Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. How many of you have struggled to define the difference between practice governance and clinical governance? I'm certainly in that group. Well, you're in the right place. By the end of this session, you will have a much clearer understanding and can start to think about how a practice governance framework might work for your organization. For those who don't know me, I'm Susan Watson, the CEO for FAMS, and I've spent many years working in senior roles in the not-for-profit sector. Now that I have a clearer understanding of the benefits of practice governance, I can see how the framework would have provided my organizations with a seamlessly embedded continued quality improvement framework from board level to frontline staff. This is because practice governance prioritizes on the quality of engagement with our clients, rather than solely emphasizing on organizational procedures. Earlier this year, Lauren and I sat in on a presentation led by NCOS, where larger organizations demonstrated their progress in establishing a practice governance framework. We both got really excited about how FAMS could work with small to medium organizations to achieve similar outcomes. We can demonstrate that size isn't everything. This innovative practice governance project presents a fantastic opportunity to pilot and develop a fit-for-purpose tool for testing, learning, and subsequent wider dissemination to support all small to medium organizations to engage in practice governance. Ultimately, we can use this framework to improve the quality and effectiveness of the work we do with children and families, which is why we all turn up at work every day. So now, with much anticipation and excitement, as I am too super keen to listen to the discussions, I can hand over to Lauren, our Sector Engagement Manager. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's such a pleasure to be here today with you all to launch our practice governance project here at FAMS in collaboration with the Parenting Research Centre. The level of interest in this initiative has been significant, and so it's prompted us to record today's session so that we can share the recording with those who aren't able to attend. During today's session, Warren Can, CEO of the Parenting Research Centre, will guide us through the intricacies of practice governance, and throughout his presentation, feel free to post any questions in the chat. We'll address as many as we can today at the conclusion of the session, but we're also going to use them to create a frequently asked questions document that will be able to be broadly distributed through the sector. Following that, we're going to delve into how your organisation can participate and discuss our project's expression of interest process. So I really want to start by welcoming you, Warren. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Okay, can I just check that you're seeing that? Okay, fantastic. Good. Look, we are absolutely delighted to be working with FAMS on this project. It's an area that's very close to our heart. It's an area that we are learning a lot about, and particularly we're having the opportunity to learn a lot about it because we're getting to work with agencies on the ground who are looking to really make a practical difference in terms of the quality of practice that they deliver, and that's been a great privilege. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon, dare I say, and we really appreciate it. I've got about 15 or 20 minutes just to take you through, I guess, what our understanding is of practice governance. So it's hopefully give you a bit of a thumbnail sketch, a bit of an idea, help you kind of get into the sense of what we're talking about, particularly in relation to helping you make a decision about the level of involvement that you and your agency would like to have in this project. And there's all sorts of ways that you can be involved. You'll hear more about that from Lauren after I'm finished here. But I just want to give you a sense of what we mean by practice governance, and particularly cover some of the terms that get used, because some of the language here in this space can be quite confusing. So really, the story really begins with practice, of course. Practice is what happens at the interface between our service and our client. And it's at the level of practice that we are actually focusing on our clients. We would all understand, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted in saying that practice is of critical importance when it comes to achieving the intended outcomes for our clients. When we're effective in our practice, then we're more likely to achieve those outcomes. When we're ineffective, we're less likely to achieve those outcomes, but even worse, we can do harm. In a way, everything else about organizational functioning, everything else about service and program design should be thought of as facilitating or providing a platform for what it is that we think is effective practice. So a practice, let me just got an issue here. Okay, so given that practice quality is absolutely critical, it really makes sense to think about how do we align the whole organization around the delivery of quality practice, and what is the role of everybody in the organization to ensure that actually happens. And when we mean everybody, we do mean everybody. We mean from the board through the executive, through to our practitioners, and ultimately everybody in the organization, including key operational staff like HR and admin staff who also are interfacing with our clients. The question for a practice governance framework is, how do we align the efforts, the energy, the focus of all of those people in order to deliver quality practice and quality experiences to the clients that we are working with? So this lands us really in terms of our first definition, and this is our go at defining what practice actually is. We're defining it as the observable skill of a worker purposely engaging, interacting, and forming a relationship with someone within their world to achieve positive outcomes. Practice is the way we put our theory of helping into action. Practice is not just processes, it's not just procedures, it's not kind of what determines how our practitioners end up interfacing with their clients. It's more about what they do once they are with their clients. Practice is what practitioners actually do. Practice is purposeful, it's intentional, it's behavior that is done for or performed for strategic reasons. It's, for most of us, it's how are we actually going to be helpful? An example of practice might be, how do we go about helping our clients identify the goals that they want to work on? How do we help our clients problem solve when they're facing challenges or issues? The how of what we do is the practice piece. The assumption when we talk about practice governance is that practice is something that we can articulate, that we can define, we can describe, we can share with others. It's something that we think of as something that can be transferred in a very deliberate manner. I mean, we probably ought to acknowledge that there are some aspects of effective practice which are more tacit, which are hard to actually describe, hard to actually put your finger on, and best learnt through experience, best learnt through, for example, observing a experienced practitioner in action. But there's a lot of practice which we can get to the point of saying, this is what good practice looks like. We can define it, we can be explicit about it, and we can share it. And as an organization, when we start doing this, when we start to own that definition of practice, when we start to describe what kind of practice it is that we're looking for, then we can start to think about systematically developing and sharing that practice together. The thing is that I think for a long time, practice has kind of been seen as the purvey of practitioners. It's what they bring with their professional training. It's what they bring with their professional knowledge. And what practitioners actually do in the services that we provide, you know, when they end up in the client's home, when they're working with a client, what they actually do often is somewhat of a mystery, certainly to boards, but often even to senior staff and to executives. What is it that practitioners actually do when they're with their clients? Many organizations do have very broad statements about practice. They might have principles that they're hanging their hat on, like being strength-based or person-centered. But how this actually translates to the level of action is often something that's hard to get a finger on, hard to actually understand. Having emphasized practice, it's really tempting to think that then the solution then is professional development, developing our staff's practice, their capacity to work with families. That is what we need to do. Yet also what we've learned over the years is that it's not just about the individual practitioner. In fact, good practice is really premised not only on a well-trained practitioner, it depends greatly on the kind of system that's built around that practitioner, the supports, the training, the kind of leadership, the kind of system that is actually put in place, the administrative systems that are put in place, the policies that are put in place. All of these things have a massive influence on how practice actually plays out and how it's developed and so on. Okay, given the importance of practice, essentially what a practice governance framework does is help the organisation, or provide a way that the organisation can focus its attention and effort on improving practice. So this leads us to our definition of what practice governance is. And our go at this is here in this slide. It's a systematic whole of organisation approach to supporting and improving quality in practice to improve outcomes for clients. And I'm going to be sort of touching on some of these kind of components of this, but let's just capture this main piece. It's a systematic whole of organisation approach to own practice and to improve practice systematically. Now, practice governance, as Lauren has kind of alluded, I think, or it might have been Susan actually, has alluded to, has its roots in clinical governance. And many of the approaches used in clinical governance in the health sector are absolutely relevant to practice governance. Yet we find that many of the concepts, the language, the ideas entailed in clinical governance don't resonate that well in the community services sector, and some translation and certainly some careful thought is needed to take some of the principles of clinical governance and apply them in an effective way when we're talking about practice governance. Okay, I also want to just highlight this piece around improving outcomes for clients. And this is where I think we have the potential to break ground when it comes to thinking about practice governance. And this is the idea of linking the practice governance agenda to the evidence-based agenda, which is to say, how can we ensure that clients are getting access to the most effective practices, programs and services? Potentially a practice governance framework is a way of doing that. And in the end, and this will be something that we will be discussing through this project, is our understanding of what good practice is. But if we define effective practice as that which achieves the outcomes that we seek, then clearly having an outcomes-focused approach is particularly important. So I think the challenge and really the opportunity that sits before us is developing an approach to practice governance that's very much built around understanding and driving improved outcomes for our clients. Okay, so what does this mean in practice? Well, in practice, what we're trying to do is draw a line of sight between what we do and the results that we get. And it's a line of sight that we want to make transparent to the whole organisation, from practitioners right through to board members. And what this requires is that we're clear about the results that we want or we're trying to achieve, and also that we have clarity in how we're going about trying to achieve those results. This means that to run a practice governance framework, we both have design elements, we have implementation elements, but we also have information elements that are needed as well, because we need to build a feedback system. We need a system that tells us these things, tells us whether or not we're actually doing what we set out to do, and tells us something about the results that we're actually getting. But one way to think about practice governance, and we're hoping this might be useful, is that really it's about helping the whole organisation be able to answer these key questions. These are really the key practice governance questions when we're taking an outcomes-focused approach. So they start with, are we clear on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with our clients? But then it goes into the design of our programs. Are we clear on how those desired outcomes will be achieved? That's the theory of change, which many of you will be familiar with. And then have we specified what needs to be done, or how will we activate that theory of change? How do we bring it to life? We need to be clear on what are the key actions that are going to support the change that we're seeking. The next question is, knowing what we want to do, are we actually doing it? This is the question of implementation effectiveness. Are we implementing effectively? Then there's a question about our clients engaging with our programs and services. Are they engaging in the way we assumed they would? In other words, are they relating to it? Are they connecting with it? Then are we seeing the intermediate changes that we expected to see? And ultimately, are we seeing the outcomes that we're aiming for? These become the critical questions. Wouldn't it be very cool if everybody could develop, formulate an answer to these questions? These are the kinds of questions, I think, that are not always thought of at the level of the board, but what practice governance is doing is challenging us to raise these questions to make them central issues in the way we govern and run organizations. So practice governance brings boards into the picture in a way that they've not always been in the past. And basically with thinking about this from a board perspective, boards, given their responsibility for the organization, given their responsibility for the strategic plan of the organization and what the organization is to achieve, they need to be able to answer those questions. They need to be able to answer those questions to know whether or not the organization is actually delivering what it's intended to do. So what is the role of a board in practice governance? Well, this is the role, is to create and ensure a culture of openness and learning, is to ensure that client voice is heard and considered, is to ensure that leadership is conducive to continuous quality improvement and the delivery of quality practice, is to be clear about how and in what ways the organization is using the levers at its disposal to really drive practice quality, like training, like post-training support, like staff selection, and that there's clarity in roles and responsibilities. In a way, the board really is owner and steward of a practice governance system, which is then, though, owned and operated by the whole organization. And in fact, I hasten to say that what we are really keen to message here is that a good practice governance system is something that supports the organization in its service delivery, that involves everybody and creates a role for everybody in driving quality improvement. So a starting point for developing a practice governance system is a framework. A framework is simply an overarching approach. It's a description of how the principles, elements, processes, and systems that support quality in practice will be drawn together and will operate within the organization. We can think of it in a way as a kind of a blueprint for how our system will work. And maybe this is a good point to say, this is one of those areas where it's not just about aligning paperwork. I mean, it's very tempting to sort of develop, well, let's say it's very easy to develop these kinds of frameworks and models. They can look flash, we can sign them off, and then they can sit on a bookshelf. And that's not what practice governance is. Practice governance is actually action. It's doing something. Practice governance is doing things. What a framework does is give us guidance to what it is that we need to do. But ultimately, we can't say we're doing practice governance until we're doing certain things. Where does it fit? Because again, this is one of these areas where language can be a little bit tricky. Here's one way of thinking about where practice governance actually sits. And it sits up there probably just below organizational values, purpose, and strategy. So when an organization has an understanding of what it's trying to achieve in the world, what difference it's trying to make, then the next step is to think about, well, how is that difference going to be made? And that's where a practice governance framework fits. Underneath that, a practice governance framework is a really good starting place for thinking about an organization-wide approach to practice. All right. So once we understand, once we have the core pieces in place, then we can start to think about, as an organization, how do we want to be with our clients? As an organization, how do we want to work with our clients? What is our organization's stance on how we work with our clients and what we do with our clients? What is the kind of environment that our practitioners come into? How do we acculturate them to our approach to practice? How do we engage them in contributing to a systematic approach to developing practice? These are the kinds of things that potentially we can start to do when we have a practice governance framework. And then once we have a governance framework, once we've started to articulate our organization-wide approach to practice, then we can start to think about the program models and practice frameworks which belong to the programs that we deliver. This is where the rubber really hits the road in terms of specific outcomes in relation to specific programs. But this kind of framework provides a kind of coherent, systematic, kind of integrated way of both selecting programs, selecting approaches to practice, and embedding that in a whole of organization approach. So I said a framework is the blueprint, but they're really, a cookie cutter approach doesn't really work, or it's not really appropriate. The process of developing a framework, the actual process of developing it, I think, ensures ownership. It ensures buy-in. On the other hand, you don't need to start from scratch. Even though the development journey, I think, is crucial to having a practice governance framework that works, there's no reason you should start from a blank sheet. And indeed, well, I'm not sure that I would say evidence, but certainly there's a lot of writing in the literature about what effective practice governance frameworks look like. We can take a lead from what other people have learned in other sectors, for example, like in health, and we can also work together to develop an approach that's going to work in this particular sector and in this particular service system. Okay, but if we were to sort of, as a starting point, if we're thinking about, well, what does a actual framework involve, then it might involve at least these 5 things. It might serve to encapsulate the organization's vision for practice. What is it that it's wanting to achieve? What are the results of the practice it's wanting to achieve? It might capture the key principles of practice. So what are the key philosophical or principle-based elements are here? And for example, this is where we've seen organizations, for example, identify, say, strength-based practice as an example, a core principle that it wants to see operationalized. This is where we are nailing that trauma-informed practice, person-centered practice, and so on, culturally inclusive practice. There are lots of examples where we might want to identify, or where you as an organization might want to identify what are the key principles that you want to capture here. And then we need to, as part of the framework, describe the system. So this is the system for ensuring effective practice, and also for delivering information that helps us continually improve that practice. And finally, spelling out some of the roles and responsibilities of people within the organization for practice governance. So I've just got a couple of minutes here just to emphasize just 2 things which I think we're aiming for in our practice governance framework. The first is to move beyond assurance to improvement. Now, I think a lot of clinical governance has fallen, well, not fallen, but has focused on quality assurance. That is sort of a checklist approach to whether or not we're following certain procedures, meeting certain standards. And all of that, of course, is necessary. But ultimately, the best protector of our clients and the strongest driver of improved outcomes will be an improvement lens. That is, engaging people in systematically seeking to develop and improve practice rather than a compliance lens. If we can successfully engage people in the process of identifying where improvements can be made, learning from our mistakes, capturing improvements, driving improvement, then that to me really is the heart of a practice governance system. This requires an organizational culture of openness, willingness to experiment, acceptance of mistakes and errors. It also involves cultivating this organization-wide commitment to improving things. It means recognizing where we're doing well, but it also means injecting a kind of impatience or a kind of drive to do better, with the overarching idea being that there is nothing that's so good that can't be made better. And it's that drive to make things better that ultimately will produce real changes for our clients. And just the final thing before I hand back over to Lauren, I think it's about time, is this idea that when operating well, a practice governance system creates a framework for emergent change as well as top-down change. That is, it should empower people who are on the front line to be active participants in the improvement process. And ultimately, as we start to think about plan, do, study, act cycles, as we start to think about who needs to be involved in the discussions around improving practice, well, guess what? We end up at the front line. We end up thinking about how do we engage our practitioners? How do we engage our practitioner leads in driving the improvement process? So whilst good leadership is absolutely necessary for this in terms of creating the culture in which this is going to be successful, there are also times when leadership needs to drive a change agenda, and a practice governance framework can be a really useful way of doing this. But critically, I think a good practice governance system facilitates emergent change. So we are really excited again about this project, because what this project is going to do is explore what this could look like in this service sector. What could this look like in small to medium-sized community organisations? How can we achieve the vision of practice governance in your context, in your setting? What would be practical? What is feasible? What is doable? What is helpful? They're the key things that we'll be considering. Together, what we'll be doing is trying to map out what does an approach to practice governance look like, what is a model that can be used, adapted, and that you guys can then take to your organizations to start the journey of developing or improving on or building on your current practice governance systems. Okay, I don't know whether that made one bit of sense. I'll catch up with chat while Lauren picks up the next piece, and then we might have some questions that we can answer. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much, Warren. That was really, really great, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge on this topic. We're now going to move into the discussion of the project itself and how your organisation can get involved. What we're doing is we're going to be calling for expressions of interest from organisations who are DCJ funded early intervention and prevention services, so that's TEI and family preservation, to co-design a practice governance framework and associated how-to guide that can be used by boards, executive staff of small to medium organisations. And then those frameworks will be shared across the sector. There will be 5 organisations chosen through this process who will form our design team. So for those organisations not yet in the place to begin this work, or they're unsuccessful in the EOI process, we will be sharing those resources and learnings and insights along the way, so you can learn along with us as we go through this process of design, and you will have access to the final frameworks and how-to guides as well. So this is a really exciting opportunity for our organisation's senior leaders to get involved in designing a fit for purpose sector framework that will support you to have greater oversight as to how your service is functioning and support it to thrive, as well as having the chance to have meaningful sector senior leadership development opportunities. And working with a really innovative research company using cutting edge best practice knowledge that's usually really only accessible to those really large NGOs. So to be eligible to be involved in this project, you'll need to complete our EOI form, which is addressing the following criteria, which I'll speak to you now. So if you do have questions as I'm talking this through, please pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to them this afternoon. So the first one is that you need to demonstrate your organisation's interest in practice governance and in having a practice governance framework in place. So some of the things that you might be considering are things like, to what extent is your board already engaged with this issue of practice quality? How does practice governance fit within your broader aspirations for your organisational development? Is your executive and board interested and committed to practice governance? Are these sort of discussions already happening at an executive and board level? Can you commit to practice governance as a priority area for your organisation, given everything else that might be going on for you at the moment? Things like, are you confident about the culture and leadership that's happening in your organisation that would be conducive to continuous in learning and improvement? So things like a no blame culture, which Warren mentioned before. Next, you'll need to think about, you'll need to really identify the proposed design team members that you'd be putting forward for this project and provide a bit of a brief background and rationale for their involvement and what they might bring to the process. So here we're really looking for senior leaders who have power and influence in an organisation. So CEOs, ops managers, board members. Ideally, you'd have 2 per organisation, but we are aware that for small organisations, 2 people could be potentially 50% of your organisation. So don't let, if one person would only be available to be able to be part of it, don't let that get in the way of your application. So here you need to explain why your nominees are well placed and qualified to contribute. Describe a little bit of the scope of their role and their capacity for leadership. And a little bit about how your nominees will interface with your executive team and your board through the design process. Next, you need to check that the nominated design team members will be supported to meet the time and activity requirements required of the design team members. So here you're going to be thinking about your organisational capacity. Are they able to have some time to be involved in this project? We're estimating it's going to be about 2 days per month, and that's including attending the workshops, a little bit of prep work for before the workshop, and then some follow-up after. So when you're involved in this project, you'll be coming to those design meetings, but there will be work that you need to kind of think about in relation to your own organisation in between those those sessions. You'll also need to be thinking about, whether you have bandwidth to focus on practice governance, given what else is going on in the organisation. Then we're going to get you to think through how you'll engage your own board through the development process. So how will you maintain regular communication with your board so that they're across what's going on? How might you begin and continue those conversations with the board through the design process so that they can bring their ideas to the table as well? Think about how you might use the information that the board shares with you and get them to be ready to implement it when we're ready to go with this approach. And then thinking through, given your board's agenda, how will you maintain momentum generated by this process over the 6-month period into the design and then implementation phase of your practice governance framework? And the final thing is you need to then describe any relevant experience and learnings your organisation could actually bring to the design table, including experience or expertise in design and implementation of practice or clinical governance, and or thinking about things like practice improvement and data-informed decision making. So the link for the EAI will go out today to all the people that registered for our session and will also be available at our website. The closing date for that is the 29th of November. So please make sure you mark this in your calendar, have a look through the process itself. We're estimating it's going to take about 40 minutes to complete. So just wanting to check in, how are we going for questions? Did anyone want to pull out any questions that they have on any of the content that has been discussed so far? How are we going in the chat? I haven't been monitoring it. Have we got any?
Yeah, so there's a question and a point. Angela asked a question there about the Aqua project as well. This is going on. The Aqua have a very similar project in Train parallel as well. And the question is there thoughts on linking the peaks together to share knowledge and expertise from design teams? So Lauren, you might want to come in here. Perhaps if I just start by saying, I think we are really keen to ensure working with FAMS that we're actually developing a framework that is practical, given a small to medium-sized organisation in the context in which you work. So that's really important because sometimes these things kind of get developed with assumptions being made about the resources available to people, and I think that doesn't always lead to things that are usable by everybody in the sector. I think there'll be lots of opportunity, though, to share insights, expertise, knowledge, and we'll absolutely be doing that. I certainly know Aqua is very open to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think, Warren, that's exactly it. This is really, our project is specifically speaking to the small to medium organisations because of exactly what you're talking about. However, we work really closely with Aqua and we would absolutely be wanting to see this as a sector-wide uplift, really wanting to see practice governance as something that is embedded across our sector, that is something that is able to be embedded by all of our organisations rather than just the ones who might have a little bit more resourcing because of their size. So yes, absolutely, this is going to be something that we'll be continuing to work closely with ACFA about.
The other point made by Anne is in relation to the DCJ program logic and guidelines and how they will feed into this process. I think there's something else there that you're talking about just in terms of the demands currently on the sector and how do we help people see the value of jumping in on this. Just in relation to funders' requirements, funders' funding guidelines, what the template will attempt to do is look at how you manage that within the context of an overarching approach to practice governance. So our position wouldn't be that a program, that a funder's program logic and guidelines is what determines the way you see your work, but obviously it's a massive input. And so what I think we will be doing together is looking at, well, how do we see that as an input? How do we operate in a way that is going to deliver on what you need for a particular funded program? And also, how do you also exercise sovereignty in your own thinking about how you're making a difference and what the critical elements of practice are for you. The other thing, Susan or Lauren, I guess the conversations with the government will be ongoing about this work, keeping them connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we think about this, this is going to be such a value add when we're looking at recommissioning, because if you can demonstrate your organisation's capacity for responding to what's working and what's not working, and to be able to really generate great outcomes from that, it's going to only elevate your organisation's standing in that respect. We also very much have DCJ's support on this particular project. They see it as a really great opportunity for our sector to, again, just lift up our quality of service, consider all of these aspects, and bring the client voice into everything that we do. So I think that, that those things are very much aligned. And that, yes, while there is obviously, you really do need to consider, is this the right thing for our organisation at this time? For some organisations, it just won't be, and that's okay, because we want to continue to support you with knowledge as we build this this project up as well. So I guess thinking about, while there might be value in jumping on board with it, is this the right time is going to be a really important consideration for your organisation. Susan, did you want to add to that at all?
I think I concur with everything you said, Lauren. The most important thing, it's about continuous quality improvement, and fundamentally that's what we're all striving for, including DCJ.
Right. There was just a question here as well about the workshops. They are all going to be online. Our colleagues at the Parenting Research Centre, who we'll introduce as well. We've got Michelle and Vanessa, who I'll just spotlight so you can see their lovely faces. They're some of the design specialists who will be working on this project, and 50% of them are based in Melbourne. So, so we will need to be facilitating all of these online. And I guess that's really important for us as well here at FAMS, is that we're wanting to ensure equity across this project. We really want to encourage our rural, regional and remote colleagues to be applying for this project just as much as any of our metro-centric organisations. So if you have questions, if you walk away from today's session and you think, oh gosh, I should have asked that, please email me directly. I will be forwarding an email with the recording of today's session and the EOI out to all of the people who registered. If there are follow-up questions that come over the next sort of day or two, if you jump offline and you go and have a cup of tea and you go, oh my gosh, talking to your colleague, that was great, but I'm wondering about this, just email me and we'll pop that into the frequently asked questions as well, and make sure that you feel really supported to be able to apply for this particular project. Great. Is there any final comments or final questions before we wrap up? Fabulous. Okay, so once again, thank you so much, PRC team. It's been so wonderful working alongside you on this project today. We are absolutely thrilled at FAMS here that this is kicking off. We see so much value in this for our sector. And yeah, for everyone else, the EOI closes on the 29th of November. We really encourage you to get your expression of interest in as soon as you can. please reach out with any questions. We can't wait to work with you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren. And I feel like I should officially cut a piece of ribbon to say, yay! This came from a little idea, and just to actually be here now in front of you all and talking about this project is amazing. So thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to PLC for joining in with us, and for Lauren for taking the lead on this project. It's going to be incredible, and I really encourage you to apply if this is the right time for you, but follow us along if it's not. We'd love you to join us on the journey.
Right. Thanks, everyone.